Hi guys, we're on our second part of our series on the life of David. And last week we talked about how Samuel came in and anointed him as the next king. But he wasn't king yet. Saul was still king. And so some things happened in between when he becomes anointed and when he becomes king. And it's a story you've all probably heard before, but I think it's worthy of being repeated. We find it in the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 17, and Israel was at war with the Philistines. It says here, let me read the first couple of verses to set the stage. Now the Philistines were gathered their armies together to battle and were gathered at Succoth, which belongs to Judah, and they camped between Succoth and Azekah in the Ephes and Damon. Anyway, these places. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up to battle array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on one side of the mountain, and Israel stood on the other side of the mountain, and with the valley in between them. So they're lined up on either side of this valley, and they're like staring each other down, almost like and in chess you have the two sides just looking at each other. And then the plot thickens in verse 4. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath, from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, or around 9 feet, some say 9'9". Anyway, a tall guy. Almost twice as tall as me. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, whose weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. He had a bronze armor on his legs and bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels. And a shield bearer went before him. Now keep that in the back of your head. We might come back to that later. He's this giant of a guy, a warrior. And then there's a challenge. Verse 8. And he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, "Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And you, the servants of Saul," Saul, the great warrior, he was tall too. He's kind of mocking them. "Why haven't you come to fight? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." This sounds like a good proposal for two nations. Why have senseless bloodshed and just have two people fight, play paper, rock, scissors, and see who wins to decide? But he doesn't end there. Notice what he says after this. Verse 10. And the Philistine said, "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all the Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. They were afraid of this great giant. But did you notice what the Philistines said? It wasn't just come fight with me. It was, "I defy Israel." Not only Israel, but maybe the God of Israel. The reputation had gone before them. This great nation, God was with and helped them. But it says that they were greatly afraid. And now we get to verse 12. It says, "Now David was the son of the Ephrathite of Bethlehem, of Jesse, of Judah, whose name was Jesse, who had 8 sons. And the man was old, advanced in years, and in the days of Saul, the 3 oldest brothers of Jesse had gone out to follow Saul in battle. The names of the 3 sons who went out were Eliab the firstborn, next to Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest, as we learned, and the 3 oldest followed Saul, but David occasionally went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. Now I want you to notice something. We didn't cover it last week, but David, after he was anointed, would go and play his harp or play music for King Saul to calm his nerves. And so he would go back and forth from his sheep to the king, from his sheep to the king, back and forth, and so he was around Saul. But now, at this time, he wasn't there helping Saul calm his nerves. He was in watching his father's sheep. And the Philistine Goliath drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. Did you guys catch this? No one came to fight. No one came to challenge him. No one said, hey, we trust God. We're going to fight this guy off. We're just going to sit here and wait. Maybe he'll go away. But morning and evening, Goliath would come out and lay this challenge down. And then the plot thickens. Then Jesse said to his son, his youngest son, now take for your brothers an ephah of dried grain and these 10 loaves, and run to your brothers at camp. And carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000, and see how your brothers fare, and bring back news of them. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. They weren't fighting, they were waiting for them to go away, because they were afraid. So David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, and took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him. Why couldn't the keeper just keep watching the sheep? And he came to the camp as the army was going out to fight and shouting for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army. But they were just waiting. And David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper and ran to the army and came to greeted his brothers. And at this moment, then as he talked with them, there was the champion Goliath, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines. And he spoke according to the same words, these same things. This challenge, I defy the God of Israel. I defy the armies of Israel. So David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. This is happening time after time. You'd think they'd figure it out. So, verse 26, when the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel. And David hears this. He hears what the giant's saying. Then David spoke to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the approach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Did you catch that? David says, why hasn't someone gone to protect the honor of God? Who is going to take away the reproach? He doesn't say, man, that money sounds good, and I've seen the king's daughter, and it'd be great for my dad to not have taxes. He doesn't say those things. He says, who is going to take away the reproach from God? And I think about that, and I think about that now. Is there people accusing God of things? There's giants in the world saying, hey, God is this and this and this, but he is not that way. And I think he's asking, who is going to stand up? Who is going to stand up and take away the reproach from God? Who is this Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in this manner, saying, so it shall be done for the man who kills him. Now Eliab, his older brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And Eliab's anger was aroused against David, and he said, why did you come down here? With whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. If you remember, when Samuel came, he passed over all the other brothers, and then David was anointed. There's something special about him. What is it? I think they were starting to catch on. They thought he was after something. And so they're angry. And David said, what have I done? I followed my father and brought you food. What have I done? Is there not a cause? Then he turned from him toward another and said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first ones did. Now when the words which David spoke were heard, they were reported to Saul, and he sent for him. Then David said to Saul, notice this. Did you notice how the news passed to Saul so quickly about this person that's saying, hey, something's got to be done? Then David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Now you remember, David wasn't there to fight. He was there to deliver the groceries. He was the Instacart or the Uber Eats. He was a shepherd boy. What business did he have fighting a giant? And Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. If you remember, last week we talked about how even though we're young, you can still do great things for God. Timothy, Paul said, don't let anyone despise your youth, but be an example to everyone. And then there's this word in verse 34. This word here, it changes everything. It changes this whole story. And David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and know what? This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. David says, hey, this Philistine's causing problems. He's giving God a bad name. Something's got to be done. And you know what? God's been with me before. He helped me save the lamb, kill the bear, and kill the lion when they came after me. So he says, this guy, he's got to be the same. And so Saul, who should have been out there himself, says to David, go, and the Lord be with you. Go and fight this giant. Now, I'm looking at this, and I'm sure you're wondering, what is it? What's the lesson here? Because all these stories in the Bible are written for a reason. They're not just stories of history. They are there for a reason. And how can I apply this to my life? Well, we have things in our life that are big, things that are impossible, things that we can't take care of. It's like a giant in our life. And I think we need a dose of courage, like David. He's been with me in the past. God's been with me in the past, so he's going to be with me in the future. So Saul clothed David. No, he's going to help him out with his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head. That's what Goliath had. And he clothed him with a coat of mail, like Goliath. And David fastened his sword to his armor. That's what he had too. And then tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And then David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. When we try to do things with human power, or maybe with the same way everyone else does, it's not going to work. We have to use the tools and the strengths that we have. He hadn't tested them, so he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, notice, one staff, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in his shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had. And his sling was in his hand. And then he drew near the Philistine. He goes, gets some rocks and smooth stones, and has his sling and his staff, and he's going towards this impossible giant. So when the Philistine came and began drawing near to David, and the man who bore the shield went before him, leading him, there's some thought about this giant, Goliath. Let me keep reading. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good-looking. So when the Philistine said to David, Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? Plural. And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said, Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the fields. Do you notice? There's some things there about Goliath. He says, Come to me. Okay? He was kind of led out there by this shield bearer. And why do you come to me at me with sticks? Well, David only had one stick. And there's some thought that there was a extra hormone in the pituitary gland, something like this, that caused him to grow so big, and with that oftentimes came double vision or bad eyesight. So he can't see real well, but he sees this guy and he's got sticks, but he's this big brute of a man. And so he says there, hey, I'm going to eat you alive. I'm going to feed you to the birds of the air. And then David said to the Philistine, he replies back, You come to me with sword and with spear and with a javelin. That was the common warfare, hand-to-hand combat. And then there's this word but. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. If we come to the giants in our life with traditional warfare, we're going to lose. If David would come with sword and with spear and with javelin, he was going to lose. But he was coming with two things. Coming in the name of the Lord, who was going to help him, and he had a different kind of warfare. Remember, he picked up some rocks, and he had his sling. And so it was, when the Philistine drew near and came near to meet David, that David hurried. He couldn't do that with all the armor, and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. Then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it, and it struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. If David would have come with sword and spear and javelin, it would have been over quickly. But because David used a different kind of warfare, one that could be done from further back and through some stones, Goliath couldn't fight against that, couldn't protect himself from it. And there's people that say that, I mean, the hitting force of a stone like that, it hits with the same force as a handgun. And it sunk into his forehead. Slingers were part of the warfare, like archers, and they would be back further and sling these stones up to 1,300 feet. They could throw these projectiles. It was a valid way to fight. But if he would have come with the sword and shield, it would have been over. And so he took Goliath by surprise, using something different, using the wisdom from God and the faith from God. And so we have these giants in our life, right? These things that seem impossible to get through. But I think God asks us, if we retaliate with the same warfare, let's say someone's attacking us. Well, if we attack with the same thing, it's not going to end well. It's like saying, someone says you're stupid, and you say, well, you're stupid too. That doesn't do anything. But when we change the tactic, battles can be won. And so, how are we fighting the battles in our life? Do we take them like David and say, hey, we got to step forward in faith, attack this giant? It's attacking God, but do it with wisdom and in a different way? How does God attack battles? He attacks them with love. Are we using love like that? Love like a stone? Are we throwing stones of love? Are we fighting the same way Goliath is? Well, it says here that he fell down to the earth. Verse 50 says, so that David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. He didn't come that way. But David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. The battle was won. The battle was the Lord's. All because one young shepherd boy decided that guy's saying some things about God that aren't true. You need to step forward in faith. And I think God asks the same thing from us. To step forward in faith, attack these giants, but with a different kind of warfare. One that's actually effective. Pray with me. God, as you give us wisdom on how to fight these battles, how to fight these giants off in our life. Give us the wisdom, the knowledge, the understanding to fight effectively. Whether it's, you know the situations that are in our life. You're the only one that can help. Human knowledge of our armor that we put on, our swords and shields and these things, they cannot fight these kind of battles. So let us use yours. In your name. Amen. Hey guys, thanks for being with me. We're going to look at David next week as a fugitive. The king, Saul, is after David. Why? Because he killed Goliath. We'll get to that story next week. Have a good week.